The night she let go. The night sky above the Willow Creek hills glittered like 1,000 promises waiting to be broken or fulfilled. Beneath the glowing canopy, the town's annual spring gala was in full swing at the luxurious Silverstone Manor, a place where laughter echoed against marble walls, where the rich and powerful mingled effortlessly, and where dreams and regrets blended like the champagne being poured endlessly into crystal flutes. Mia Carter stood just outside the ballroom doors, clutching her small silver clutch so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. The soft melody of violins floated through the air, the kind of elegant music that made her feel out of place. She hadn't wanted to come tonight. She had told herself over and over that she wasn't ready to face the world again. Not after the betrayal. Not after losing the man she thought she would marry. Not after 3 months of trying to pick up the shattered pieces of her confidence. But her best friend, Emily, had other plans. Emily had shown up at Mia's apartment earlier that evening with 2 dresses, a curling iron, and that unstoppable, mischievous grin that could make the sun rise on the darkest days. "You're coming," Emily had declared, marching straight into her closet. "You have spent enough nights crying into wine glasses and pretending work emails are your social life. Tonight, you're putting on a dress, you're walking into that gala, and you're going to remember that you're still alive." Mia had tried to protest, but the determination in her best friend's eyes had been unshakable. And so, hours later, she found herself wrapped in a midnight blue gown that shimmered with every movement, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders in soft curls, her heart beating nervously as she stood on the threshold of the Silverstone ballroom. Inside, chandeliers dripped with light like captured stars, and the air smelled faintly of roses, perfume, and ambition. People in elegant attire floated between tables, smiling too widely, laughing too loudly, pretending they all had everything figured out. Mia, on the other hand, felt like a fraud. She was a small-town girl who worked as an assistant at a law firm, a woman who still lived in the apartment she and her ex had shared because she couldn't bear to start over yet. And here she was, surrounded by glittering strangers who looked like they belonged to a different world entirely. Emily spotted her hesitation instantly and slipped her arm through hers, whispering in her ear, "Head up, sweetheart. You look like a goddess who doesn't owe anyone an explanation." For the first time in weeks, Mia smiled genuinely. She took a deep breath, stepped inside, and let the music and chatter swallow her. The night passed in a blur of polite conversations, kind compliments, and endless glasses of champagne. She laughed when Emily introduced her to a group of business owners, smiled through small talk with people she barely knew, and tried her best to act like her heart wasn't still bruised. Every now and then, she'd glance toward the dance floor, watching couples move in harmony, wishing, just for a moment, that she could be one of them again, that she could believe in magic, trust, and beginnings. Then, out of nowhere, her gaze collided with someone's across the room. He was standing near the grand staircase, a tall figure in a black suit that fit him with quiet authority. His hair was slightly tousled, his posture relaxed, yet confident, as though the entire room bent around his presence without him even trying. He was talking to someone, but his attention shifted the second he caught her looking. And when their eyes met, time seemed to hesitate, just long enough for her heart to skip. He smiled, slow, deliberate, the kind of smile that carried both warmth and mystery. It wasn't the kind of grin that demanded attention. It was the kind that invited it. Mia quickly looked away, pretending to be fascinated by the champagne glass in her hand, but the damage was done. She could feel his gaze lingering, studying her with curiosity. A part of her wanted to disappear into the crowd, but another part, a quieter, braver part, wanted to see if he'd come closer, and he did. Within minutes, she felt a presence beside her. "You look like you're thinking about running away," said a deep, calm voice that sent a strange chill down her spine. She turned slightly and saw him standing there, closer now. Up close, he was even more striking, broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of storm clouds before rain and a faint stubble that made him look rugged, imperfectly perfect. "Maybe I am," Mia replied softly, trying to sound casual even though her pulse was racing. He chuckled, a low, genuine sound that felt oddly comforting. "Then I hope you don't. It would be a shame to leave before the best part of the night." She arched an eyebrow. And what part is that? The one you don't plan, he said, holding out his hand. Come dance with me. Her first instinct was to refuse. She didn't know this man, and everything about him felt too unexpected. But something in his tone, something in his eyes made her want to take a chance. Maybe it was the champagne, or maybe it was the universe reminding her that life didn't wait for permission. Slowly, hesitantly, she placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, a spark shot through her, subtle but undeniable. He led her onto the dance floor with an ease that made it feel like she'd done this 100 times before. The music changed to a slow rhythm, the kind that made the world fade away. As they began to move together, Mia realized how long it had been since she had felt this close to someone, how long since she had felt seen, really seen. I'm Nathan, he said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. Mia, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Mia, he repeated her name slowly, as if tasting it. Beautiful name, beautiful woman. She blushed and looked down, smiling despite herself. You're quite the charmer, aren't you? Only when it feels right, he said, his voice calm but sincere. And right now it does. As they swayed under the chandelier, Mia forgot about the past, forgot about the hurt and betrayal, forgot about everything except the rhythm of the music and the steady heartbeat she felt against his chest. The rest of the ballroom melted away until it was just them, two strangers sharing a moment that neither could fully explain. And when he gently brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, she felt a wave of warmth she hadn't known she was capable of feeling again. When the song ended, Nathan didn't let go immediately. Their eyes met again, closer this time, and before either of them could think or speak, he leaned in. It wasn't a rushed or desperate kiss. It was soft, curious, honest. The kind of kiss that carried the possibility of something neither of them had expected to find. For a heartbeat, Mia froze, shocked by her own daring. But then, slowly, she kissed him back, letting herself be swept away by the sensation of something real. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing unevenly. Nathan smiled faintly. I'm sorry if that was too forward. It wasn't, she whispered. It was unexpected. The best things usually are. They spent the rest of the night talking, about life, about regrets, about the things people lose when they stop believing in themselves. Nathan was thoughtful, kind, and surprisingly grounded for someone who carried himself like a man used to being in control. Mia found herself opening up, telling him about her failed relationship, about the loneliness that had crept into her life like fog. He listened, not to fix her, but to understand. And for the first time in a long time, she felt heard. When the gala began to wind down, he offered to walk her out. The cool night air kissed her cheeks as they stepped into the moonlight. Thank you for tonight, she said softly. No, he replied with a half smile. Thank you for not running away, she laughed quietly. Maybe I should have asked for your number. Maybe you still can. But something inside her held back. She didn't know why. Maybe because the night already felt too perfect, too dreamlike. Maybe she was afraid reality would ruin it. Maybe next time, she said instead. Nathan studied her face for a long moment, as if memorizing it. Then I hope next time comes soon. He took her hand gently and kissed it before stepping back, disappearing into the shadows of the parking lot. Mia stood there, her heart still racing, the ghost of his kiss still warm on her lips. She had no idea who he really was, no idea that this mysterious man she'd met under chandeliers and soft music was about to change the course of her life in ways she couldn't have imagined. Because come Monday morning, when the courthouse introduced their new sheriff, a man named Nathan Hale, millionaire, former city officer, and the youngest sheriff in the state, Mia's world would stop spinning for the second time in one weekend. And this time, she wouldn't be able to walk away. The Monday revelation. The first rays of sunlight crept through the cream curtains of Mia's small apartment, scattering across her bedroom like delicate brushstrokes. The sound of the alarm clock filled the air, steady and insistent, pulling her from the soft grip of dreams she couldn't quite remember but didn't want to leave behind. She opened her eyes slowly, her mind caught between sleep and reality, her heart still dancing somewhere in that blurred space where memories of the gala shimmered like distant music. For a brief moment, she forgot who she was supposed to be, the quiet, efficient court clerk who kept her emotions hidden behind polite smiles and well-organized files. And instead, she felt like the woman who had laughed, danced, and kissed a stranger under a golden chandelier. Then the alarm blared again, and reality returned, soft but unrelenting. Mia groaned and reached out to silence it, her thoughts immediately slipping back to Nathan, the man whose name had echoed in her mind all weekend like a melody she couldn't stop humming. She had replayed that night in her head over and over again, the warmth of his hand, the calm power of his voice, the way he had looked at her like she was something rare and worth discovering. It wasn't love. Not yet, she told herself. But there had been something undeniably real, something that stirred life back into her chest after months of numbness. Still, she had woken up the next morning convincing herself that it was just one of those rare, fleeting encounters life sometimes gifts you, the kind that changes you quietly but never returns. By the time she got ready and walked into the Riverside County Courthouse, the usual Monday hum of conversations filled the hallways. Papers shuffled, printers whirred, and the faint scent of coffee hung in the air. It was a familiar rhythm, predictable and steady, exactly what she thought she needed. Yet today, something felt different. There was an unusual buzz in the atmosphere, that subtle electricity that only happens when people are curious. Whispering and slightly nervous, her co-worker Beverly, a woman in her 50s with a motherly heart and an endless supply of gossip, leaned over the desk the moment Mia sat down. "You will not believe this," she whispered dramatically, her eyes wide with excitement. "We're getting a new sheriff today." Mia blinked, trying to focus on the paperwork in front of her. "A new sheriff?" she repeated absent-mindedly. "What happened to Sheriff Dawson?" "Retired last week," Beverly said, lowering her voice as though sharing state secrets. "Apparently this new guy is something else. Came all the way from Los Angeles. Young, ambitious, and—" she wiggled her eyebrows mischievously. "They say he's quite handsome, too." Mia gave a polite laugh, not thinking much of it. "Well, I guess our town could use some fresh energy." "Oh, honey," Beverly said with a knowing grin. "You have no idea. Everyone's already talking. The judge is holding a formal introduction ceremony later in the conference room. You'd better come. I have a feeling it's going to be worth seeing." Mia smiled faintly and went back to sorting files, but her thoughts wandered again. For some reason, the mention of someone young and ambitious from Los Angeles sent a strange ripple through her chest. It was probably nothing, she told herself. Just her imagination playing tricks on her because she couldn't stop thinking about Nathan. After all, what were the odds? He'd probably gone back to whatever big city he'd come from, living a life far removed from her quiet corner of the world. By 11 o'clock, half the courthouse staff had already gathered near the conference room doors. Mia, not wanting to look too eager, joined Beverly near the back. The murmur of voices filled the air, secretaries, officers, clerks, and lawyers all whispering in anticipation. At the front, Judge Patterson adjusted his glasses and tapped the microphone, calling for silence. "Good morning, everyone. As many of you know, Riverside County officially welcomes a new sheriff today, a man whose record of integrity and courage speaks for itself. He comes to us with years of experience in law enforcement and a strong commitment to rebuilding community trust. Please join me in welcoming Sheriff Nathan Hale." For a moment, Mia's entire body went still. The name hit her like a thunderclap. Her hand froze mid-air, and her breath caught somewhere in her throat. She thought she must have misheard it. Nathan Hale, it couldn't be. It couldn't possibly. But then he stepped into the room. And the world. For Mia stopped moving. There he was, and the man from the gala. The stranger who had held her in his arms under a chandelier. The man who had kissed her so gently she had forgotten heartbreak even existed. Except now he wasn't just Nathan. He was Sheriff Nathan Hale, standing tall in a crisp uniform, a badge gleaming on his chest, his posture commanding and confident. He looked older somehow, more composed, his entire presence radiating authority and quiet strength. Yet behind that professional exterior, his eyes searched the room until they found hers. The moment their gazes met, a rush of heat surged through her veins. She tried to look away, but she couldn't. His expression changed, just slightly, from practiced calm to something softer, something like recognition and disbelief. She saw it clearly in his eyes. He was just as stunned as she was. Beverly elbowed her gently. "Oh my," she whispered under her breath. "He's even better looking than I imagined. And look at those shoulders. Mia, are you seeing this?" But Mia barely heard her. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Every memory from Friday night flooded back at once. The laughter, the dance, the kiss. And now he was here, in uniform, in her workplace, as her new sheriff. She wanted to disappear into the floor. Nathan took the microphone from Judge Patterson, his voice steady as he spoke. "Thank you, Your Honor. It's an honor to be here in Riverside County. I've worked in law enforcement for a long time, and I've learned that communities thrive not because of rules, but because of trust. My goal is to serve this town, to listen, and to protect. I hope to earn your confidence as we build something meaningful together." The room filled with polite applause, but all Mia could think was how surreal it all felt. She kept her head down, hoping he wouldn't notice her again, though she could feel his eyes glancing her way more than once. When the introduction ended, people began to approach him, shaking hands, introducing themselves, laughing easily. Beverly nudged Mia again. "Let's go say hi." "Oh, no," Mia said quickly, her voice trembling. I have to finish some filings. You go ahead." But Beverly wasn't fooled. "You're pale, sweetheart. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Mia lied, forcing a smile. "Just a headache." She slipped away before anyone could stop her, rushing toward the file room at the end of the hall. The door clicked shut behind her, and she leaned against it, her chest heaving. What were the odds that the man she had met at a gala, the one she thought she'd never see again, would turn out to be her new boss? And not just any man, but a sheriff. A man with power, responsibility, and secrets of his own. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to think, trying to breathe. This was insane. The town was small. People talked. If anyone ever found out that she'd kissed him at a party, that she'd spent half the night talking to him like some love-struck fool, she'd never live it down. And yet, beneath the panic, there was a small, undeniable spark of something else. Excitement. Fate had brought him back into her life, and she couldn't help but wonder why. Hours later, as she was sorting through a stack of case files in the hallway, she felt that familiar presence behind her again. She didn't have to turn around to know it was him. His voice came softly, low enough that no one else could hear. "Mia." Her breath caught. She turned slowly, her heart threatening to leap out of her chest. There he was, standing only a few feet away, his expression unreadable but his eyes intense. "So, it really is you," he said quietly. "I thought I was losing my mind when I saw you." She swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "Sheriff Hale," she managed, forcing formality between them like a wall. "Welcome to Riverside County." He gave a small, almost amused smile. "Sheriff Hale? That's new. 2 days ago, it was just Nathan." Her cheeks flushed. "That was before I knew who you were. And now that you do?" he asked gently. She hesitated, her gaze flicking to the open hallway. "Now I know you're my boss, and that means we keep things professional." Nathan studied her quietly, his eyes softening. "If that's what you want." "It's what's appropriate," she said, her voice firm even though her hands trembled slightly. He nodded slowly, a flicker of something unspoken passing across his face. "Understood." But then, after a small pause, he added quietly, "For what it's worth, I'm glad it's you. I don't know what this means yet, but I do know I haven't stopped thinking about you." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the hallway, her heart aching with confusion. She wanted to tell herself it was nothing, that it was just coincidence, that the universe wasn't playing some impossible game with her. But deep down, she knew. Life didn't bring people back by accident. And as she watched him disappear around the corner, his badge gleaming under the soft courthouse lights, Mia realized something terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Her story with Nathan wasn't over. It was just beginning. The sheriff's secret. Passed for the next few days, the courthouse seemed to hum with an energy that Mia couldn't quite escape. It was as if Nathan's arrival had stirred something in the quiet rhythm of everyone's routine, especially hers. Wherever she went, she could hear people whispering about him, how professional he was, how decisive he seemed, how polite yet commanding his presence felt. Every time his name floated through the hallways, Mia's heart reacted before her mind could stop it. She tried her best to avoid him, keeping her head down and focusing on her work, convincing herself that distance was the safest choice. But fate had a way of drawing people together, and every time she turned a corner or stepped into a new room, it was as though he was already there, waiting. It started with simple encounters, a brief nod in the hallway, a quiet exchange over a document, a polite greeting in the morning that carried too much meaning beneath its surface. Nathan was respectful, always careful not to cross any lines, but there was something about his gaze, the way it lingered on her for a fraction longer than necessary, that left her breathless. Sometimes he would stop by her desk under the guise of work, asking about records or requesting case updates. Each conversation was perfectly professional, yet the air between them was never neutral. It was charged, silent, but undeniable. One afternoon, as the sun poured through the courthouse windows in golden sheets, Mia found herself in the archives room, sorting through old files. The scent of paper and dust filled the air, and the only sound was the soft rustle of pages. She was lost in thought when she heard the door creak open behind her. She turned and froze. Nathan stood there, his jacket draped over one arm, his shirt sleeves rolled up just below his elbows, a sight that made her heart stutter in her chest. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said softly, his voice steady, deep, familiar. "It's fine," she replied, trying to sound composed even though she felt anything but. "Just catching up on some filing." He nodded and stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sunlight slanted across the room, cutting through the dust in delicate lines. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he said at last, his tone careful, deliberate. "Not as your boss, but as me." Mia set the file down slowly, her pulse rising. "Nathan," she began cautiously, "I think it's better if we don't—" He shook his head, stepping closer. "Please, just hear me out." There was something in his eyes that made her pause, not the confident gleam of authority she'd seen in meetings, but something gentler, heavier. "I didn't come here just to wear a badge, Mia," he said quietly. "I came here to start over." She frowned slightly. "Start over?" He exhaled slowly, glancing toward the window. "Los Angeles. It changes people. I was a detective there. I saw things I wish I could forget. Corruption, greed, people who wore power like a weapon instead of a duty. I tried to fight it, tried to stay true to why I joined in the first place, but it cost me more than I expected." His voice dropped lower, his expression tightening. "My partner was killed during an undercover operation 18 months ago. We were close, like brothers. I tried to expose what went wrong, but the department buried it to protect their image. I couldn't stay after that, so I left. I sold my apartment, took the settlement, and came here. That's why people keep calling me the Millionaire Sheriff. It's not from ambition. It's from guilt. Money never filled what I lost." Mia stood there, speechless, her heart aching with sympathy. The strength in his voice wasn't arrogance, it was pain, disguised as control. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I had no idea." He gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Most people don't. They see the uniform, the new title, and they think I've got everything together. But the truth is, I'm just trying to remember who I was before everything fell apart." She hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Nathan, you're doing more than remembering. You're rebuilding. That takes courage." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. There was something grounding about her words, something he hadn't realized he needed until that very moment. "You always know the right thing to say," he murmured. "I just say what I feel," she replied softly. "That's what makes it real." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was warm, filled with understanding. Mia could feel the walls she had built after her heartbreak beginning to crumble. Nathan wasn't just another man trying to charm her. He was a man who had been broken too, who knew what it was to lose everything and still find the strength to stand again. Before she could say anything more, a sudden knock broke the quiet, and the door opened to reveal Beverly holding a stack of papers. "Oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt," she said with a grin that made Mia's cheeks flush instantly. "Sheriff, the judge is looking for you." Nathan nodded calmly. "Thank you, Beverly. I'll be there in a minute." As soon as the door closed again, he turned to Mia, his voice softer now. "I didn't mean to put all that on you. I just wanted you to know why I'm here. Why I can't pretend what happened Friday didn't matter." Her chest tightened, emotions swirling inside her like a storm. "Nathan, this is complicated," she said quietly. "You're the sheriff. I work here. People talk. If anyone found out, I'm not asking for anything," he interrupted gently. "Just honesty. From both of us. If you feel nothing, tell me, and I'll respect that." But she couldn't say that, because it would be a lie. She looked at him, her eyes shining with something between fear and longing. "I don't know what I feel," she admitted. "All I know is that you scare me. Not because I don't trust you, but because I do." Nathan's expression softened, his voice low. "Then we'll take it one step at a time. No pressure, no expectations, just honesty." For a long moment they stood there, the world outside fading into silence. The late afternoon sun painted the room in gold, and the air between them seemed to hum with something fragile yet unbreakable. Then he gave a small nod, stepped back, and left her standing there, her heart pounding like a drum that refused to quiet. That evening, as Mia walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, she thought about his words. About starting over, about second chances. About how pain could build strength instead of destroying it. She thought about how they were both survivors of different battles, both afraid to trust again, but too drawn to each other to ignore the possibility. Maybe, she thought, fate didn't bring people back to remind them of their pain, but to show them that healing could look like something unexpected, like kindness, like understanding, like a dance under chandeliers that refused to fade from memory. When she reached her apartment, she paused at her door and looked up at the night sky, remembering how it had looked that first evening at the gala. For the first time in months, she whispered a quiet thank you to the universe, not for fixing her heart, but for reminding her that it still worked. She didn't know where her story with Nathan was going, but deep down she knew this much. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was the beginning of something that could change them both. The scandal and the storm rain rolled across the town of Riverside that Friday morning. Slow and unhurried, a curtain of silver that wrapped the courthouse in a soft hush. The streets glistened with reflections of passing cars, and every drop seemed to echo the unease that had begun to coil quietly through the small community. For Mia Carter, the day started the same as any other. Coffee in a chipped blue mug. Papers clutched against her chest, hair pinned neatly beneath her coat, but inside she felt that familiar trembling tension that only uncertainty could bring. It had been 3 weeks since Nathan's arrival. 3 weeks since the unexpected confession in the archives room, and though she and Nathan had kept their distance in public, the current between them hadn't weakened. It had grown, silent and steady, beneath every polite nod, every careful glance, every moment they passed each other in the narrow courthouse hallways. She told herself they were fine, that nothing inappropriate had happened, that their hearts could remain disciplined even when their thoughts betrayed them. But human hearts were stubborn, and hers had begun to betray her more each day. Late at night, when the world quieted and she sat at her kitchen table surrounded by papers she pretended to read, she would find herself thinking of him, of the pain he had endured, of the strength in his eyes, of the rare gentleness in his smile that seemed to appear only when she was near. Yet every morning she rebuilt her walls, reminding herself that he was the sheriff, her superior, a man with a past heavy enough to crush anyone who got too close. By mid-morning, whispers had begun to ripple through the courthouse halls. Beverly appeared at her desk with her usual air of dramatic concern. "Something's going on upstairs," she said, her voice low but eager. "Some reporter from Los Angeles is here asking questions about Sheriff Hale, something about an old investigation, something he supposedly covered up." Mia's pen froze over the page. Her first instinct was disbelief, followed swiftly by fear. She remembered his words about leaving L.A., the pain in his voice when he spoke of losing his partner, of corruption, of betrayal, and she knew that whatever this was, it would reopen wounds he had never wanted the world to see. By noon, the courthouse buzzed with rumor. Nathan's office door remained closed. Reporters lingered outside the building, umbrellas tilted against the rain, cameras glinting beneath the dull sky. Mia watched from her window as one microphone after another flashed with his name, and something inside her broke. It wasn't just worry. It was anger. Anger that the world never let a man heal quietly, anger that it wanted to turn his pain into a spectacle. Without thinking, she rose from her chair and headed toward his office. Inside, Nathan sat behind his desk, the blinds half drawn, the faint light carving sharp lines across his face. He looked tired, older, the strength in his posture tempered by exhaustion. A single folder lay open before him, filled with old clippings and reports from Los Angeles. He didn't look up when she entered. He must have known she would come. "They found it," he said finally, his voice low and steady. "The story about the investigation I tried to reopen after my partner's death. They're saying I interfered, that I falsified evidence. None of it's true, but in politics, truth comes second to headlines." Mia closed the door behind her and walked to the desk. "Is there proof you didn't?" she asked quietly. He nodded once. "There's a recording. Internal Affairs had it, but it was never released. The man responsible for the cover-up retired 2 months ago, and the files were supposed to be sealed. Someone must have leaked them to make noise." He ran a hand over his face and exhaled deeply. "I came here to escape all that, Mia. I wanted peace. But peace doesn't seem interested in me." She moved closer, her voice soft but firm. "Then we fight back. You've spent your life protecting people, Nathan. Now let someone protect you." He looked up at her then, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't get involved. This could drag you into a storm you don't deserve." She met his gaze without flinching. "I already am involved. You walked into that ballroom, you smiled at me, and somehow I forgot how to guard my heart. So don't tell me to stay out now." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain tapped against the window, soft but relentless. Then, without a word, Nathan stood and walked around the desk until he was only a breath away from her. His voice, when he spoke again, was quieter, almost broken. "I don't know how this ends," he murmured, "but I know I can't do it alone." That evening, as the storm outside thickened, Mia helped him sift through old records, scanning for details that could clear his name. The courthouse was nearly empty, the lights dimmed, the only sound the rustle of paper and the occasional thunder rolling in the distance. Hours passed unnoticed. At some point, Nathan removed his tie, sleeves rolled up, concentration etched across his face. Mia watched him work, his calm focus, the discipline of a man who had faced chaos before, and realized just how deeply she admired him. When their fingers brushed across the same file, a jolt of electricity moved through her, but neither pulled away. For a second, the world held its breath. "Mia," he said quietly, still looking at the papers, but speaking as though confessing something heavier. "When I met you that night, I wasn't looking for anyone. I didn't even want to be there, but you made me remember what it felt like to hope again." Her throat tightened. She wanted to answer, but words deserted her. Instead, she reached for his hand and squeezed gently. "We'll fix this," she said, her voice trembling. "We'll prove the truth." Hours later, after finding a lead that could trace the leak back to L.A., they locked the files and stepped into the empty hallway. The storm outside had not eased. The wind howled through the trees, and lightning painted the world in fleeting flashes of white. Nathan walked her to the courthouse steps, umbrella shielding them both. For a moment, the thunder faded, leaving only the sound of rain on the pavement. "You shouldn't have to stand in the middle of my mess," he said softly. She shook her head. Maybe this is exactly where I'm supposed to stand. Nathan studied her, the rain catching in his lashes, his jaw set, but his eyes full of gratitude and something deeper. "You're remarkable, Mia Carter," he whispered, almost to himself. "You make me believe in good things again," she smiled faintly. "And you make me believe that good men still exist." For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other, two souls trying to find calm in the chaos. Then, as the rain poured harder, Nathan leaned forward and kissed her forehead gently, not out of impulse or desire, but out of reverence, a quiet promise that whatever storm awaited them, they would face it together. When she finally drove home that night, the streets shimmered under the relentless downpour, but inside her car, a strange calm settled. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of uncertainty. She wasn't running from heartbreak or loneliness. She was walking straight into the unknown, beside a man who had every reason to give up but still chose to stand tall. The next morning, the newspapers would twist the story further, headlines screaming about scandal, power, and suspicion. But what no one could see, what no one could ever print, was the quiet resilience being born between them, the courage to face both judgment and truth. And as dawn approached, the storm outside began to fade, giving way to the fragile light of a new day, the kind that carries both consequence and redemption. Mia didn't yet know it, but this storm would become the turning point, not just for Nathan's name, but for her own heart. Because sometimes the worst chaos doesn't destroy you. It washes everything else away until all that's left is who you really are, the truth, the trial, and the promise. The storm that had rattled Riverside for days finally broke into a quiet, steady drizzle that washed the dust from the courthouse steps and left the air heavy with the scent of renewal. By Monday morning, the headlines had reached every corner of town. Sheriff Hale under investigation for Los Angeles scandal. Cameras crowded outside the old brick building. Reporters shouted questions, and townspeople whispered as though the man they had admired had suddenly turned into a mystery. Mia walked through the crowd with her head held high, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. She had spent the entire weekend combing through Nathan's files, tracking old names, linking dates, cross-checking case numbers until her eyes burned. Somewhere in those papers was the truth, the piece that would finally prove Nathan innocent. She was sure of it, and she was not about to let rumor decide the story of the only man who had ever looked at her and seen more than the quiet clerk behind the desk. Inside, the courthouse felt different. It was the same marble floors, the same portraits of past judges, but an invisible weight hung over every conversation. Nathan's office door was open, and she saw him standing by the window, his uniform perfectly pressed, yet his shoulders slightly bowed. He turned when he heard her footsteps. There was gratitude in his expression, but also exhaustion, the kind that comes when a man is fighting ghosts that refuse to die. "They're calling for a review hearing," he said quietly. "The judge wants everything from Los Angeles, statements, reports, recordings. If we don't find what we need soon, I'll be suspended until the investigation closes." His tone was calm, almost resigned, but his eyes told another story. Fear not for himself, but for what his presence might do to the town he had sworn to protect. Mia placed a folder on his desk. "Then we give them more truth than they can twist," she said. "I found something. The day your partner died, there was a second call logged into the department system, an order to stand down. It was erased in the final report, but I found a timestamp in the digital archive. Whoever sent that order wanted the operation to fail." Nathan stared at her as if he could scarcely believe what he was hearing. "You found this on your own?" She nodded. Someone had to look at it without fear. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he moved toward her slowly, his hand trembling just enough to betray the emotion he was trying to contain. "You don't know what this means," he murmured. "You might have just saved me." She smiled faintly. "Maybe we saved each other." The hearing was scheduled for Wednesday, held in the largest conference room in the courthouse. Reporters filled every corner, their cameras poised, their pens ready to bleed headlines. Judge Patterson presided, his expression carved from stone. Nathan sat at the front table, his posture straight but his jaw tight. Mia sat behind him, clutching the folder like a shield. When the proceedings began, the lead investigator from Los Angeles presented the accusations. Interference, falsified evidence, obstruction. Each word fell like a hammer, yet Nathan did not flinch. When it was his turn to speak, he rose with quiet dignity. "I did what I believed was right," he said. "I refused to stay silent when silence meant betraying a man who died doing his duty. If that is my crime, I accept it." Murmurs rippled through the room. Then Mia stood. Her hands shook, but her voice was clear. "Your Honor, with permission, I have new evidence." She stepped forward, her heels clicking softly on the tile, and placed the folder before the judge. "The missing timestamp proves that a higher official ordered the stand down. The corruption didn't come from Sheriff Hale. It came from those who silenced him." The judge examined the documents, his brows furrowing deeper with every line. Minutes stretched like hours until he finally looked up. "This," he said slowly, "changes everything." The decision came swiftly. Nathan Hale was cleared of all wrongdoing. The department in Los Angeles was ordered to reopen the case, and the press that had gathered to watch his fall now found themselves recording his vindication. But for Nathan, the relief was quiet, almost solemn. When the crowd dispersed and the cameras finally turned away, he stepped outside into the fading light of afternoon, where Mia waited on the courthouse steps. The rain had stopped, but drops still clung to her hair, glinting like tiny fragments of sunlight. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he reached for her hand, his voice rough with gratitude. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." She shook her head gently. "No, Nathan. You just needed someone to remind you that you were still the man who fought for what was right." He smiled. A real, unguarded smile that softened every sharp line in his face. "You don't know how long it's been since someone said that to me." She looked at him steadily. "Maybe you should start believing it again." That night, the town of Riverside gathered quietly at the cafe on Main Street, a spontaneous celebration that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with pride. People who had once whispered now raised glasses in his honor, and Nathan thanked them with the humility of a man who had learned the cost of both trust and redemption. When the evening began to thin and the music softened, he found Mia sitting near the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. He sat beside her, the air between them easy now, the silence comfortable. "You could have walked away," he said. "Most would have." "I've spent too much of my life walking away from things that scared me," she answered. "This time I decided to stay." He studied her for a long moment, then reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "You know, when I left Los Angeles, I promised myself I would never mix my heart with my work again. But then you walked into my life, and every promise I made to protect myself started to feel like a prison." She met his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "And now? Now I think some promises are meant to be broken." Outside, the rain began again, soft, cleansing, endless. He stood and offered his hand, the same hand that had once led her onto a ballroom floor weeks ago. She took it without hesitation, and together they stepped into the quiet street where puddles shimmered like mirrors of the night sky. He pulled her gently into his arms, and for a long, unhurried moment they simply stood there beneath the lamplight, two souls who had weathered different storms but found the same shore. Months passed. Nathan continued his work with renewed strength, restoring faith in the badge that had once been stained by others' greed. Mia, once content to hide behind files and paperwork, began to study law herself, inspired by the courage she had witnessed. They didn't need grand declarations or promises carved in stone. Their connection lived in the steady rhythm of shared mornings, in laughter over late-night dinners, in the quiet certainty that they had found something rare and unbreakable. On a clear spring evening nearly a year later, Nathan drove her back to Silverstone Manor, the place where their story had begun. The ballroom lights glowed softly, the air scented with lilacs, music drifting like memory. "Do you remember that night?" he asked, offering a hand with that same familiar, dangerous smile. She laughed softly. "How could I forget? It was the night I stopped running." They danced slowly, surrounded by strangers yet alone in their own world. When the song ended, Nathan leaned close, his words barely audible above the music. "Mia Carter," he said, "I don't have diamonds and I don't have lines rehearsed, but I have truth. I have you, and I think that's everything." She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with quiet tears. That's all I ever needed. And as he kissed her, not with the uncertain passion of that first night, but with the calm certainty of a love that had survived scandal, pain, and redemption, the world around them seemed to fade until only the sound of their hearts remained. The town of Riverside would remember him as the sheriff who brought back justice. But Mia would remember him differently, as the man who taught her that love isn't found in perfect moments, but in imperfect souls brave enough to try again. Beneath the chandeliers, their reflections shimmered in the polished floor. A reminder that sometimes life doesn't give second chances. It gives new beginnings disguised as storms. And in the quiet after the music faded, Mia knew that everything they had endured, the kiss, the chaos, the courage, had led them right here, into a peace neither had ever known.